Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon on what I know is going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion on contactless payments and transportation. My name is Chantal Hitchcock, and I work on the industry relations team at Payments Canada, and I will be the moderator for this session today. Just quickly want to remind the audience that you can put your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to get to them as much as possible. So I think we can all agree that there are tremendous opportunities in the contactless payment space, especially in transit. Even though Canada is a global leader in debit card use, Canadian consumers have been limited in the amount of debit-enabled payment options that are available in the marketplace. The need for speed and available connectivity have been driving the move towards contactless payments in the transit space, and now also so has physical distancing, unfortunately. Well, I've been grateful to have the opportunity to lead the initiative at Payments Canada to develop the rule that enables the delayed authorization point of service payments. I know everyone has come here to listen to the real innovators actually making it happening in our ecosystem. So I'm extremely excited to be joined by my esteemed panel of experts in their field, Mark, Taya, and Andrew. So let's get straight into introductions. Mark, maybe let's start with you. Just introduce yourself and maybe give us a little background on how what brought you to this panel today.
Thanks, Chantal. I'm with the TransLink, which is here in Metro Vancouver region, is the Transportation Authority. TransLink is responsible for transit service, which includes rail, bus, light rail, heavy rail, inner harbor ferry, and accessible transit. But TransLink is also responsible for the major road networks and bridges and overall goods as well as people movement across the region. My role with TransLink is as Director of Compass Operations. Compass is our smart card program that we use for electronic payments, and contactless payments is part of the service offering that we have in market today. So for TransLink, we actually allow our agency card, the Compass card, but also contactless credit cards, smartphones, and those payments as well right now.
Thanks, Mark. Taya, let's go with you.
Thank you, Chantal. So yeah, I'm Taya Leybman. I'm the Vice President of Technology, PRESTO Technology at Metrolinx. Metrolinx is the regional transportation agency under the Ministry of Transport, and we're focused on delivering service specifically for 11 transit agencies across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and for Ottawa. So PRESTO is kind of the fare payment or fare collection system for those 11 agencies. We process about pre-pandemic 2 billion in loads per year with 60 million boardings per month on transit services. We've got about 5 million registered cards out in the market and about 2 million unique cards used monthly. And I joined PRESTO in 2019 after having worked for some time with Transport for London in the UK, where the fare collection kind of strategy and approach is really advanced, and came here to help drive the modernization of PRESTO technology and introduce new ways of paying for our customers.
Thanks, Taya. Andrew, last but not least.
Thanks, Chantal. Well, I'm with Interac Corp, and for those who may not be familiar with us, Interac operates the Canadian debit network, as well as eTransfer, which is our digital money movement platform. Some of you have probably used it in the past. It has its origins as a P2P system, but has recently expanded into both P2P and B2B use cases, including commercial payments. I'll be remiss not to mention that we're working with our friends at Payments Canada to build the faster payment system for the future. As for myself, I lead our mobility program here at Interac, where our goal is pretty simple. We want to ensure that Canadians have safe and frictionless experiences for all their mobility needs, which may include things like public transit, rideshare, parking, and of course, some of the exciting emerging areas of micromobility as well.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So I'm just going to get right into some of the questions. So looking at ubiquity in the transit space, what what are some of the benefits to the delayed authorization payments or the contactless payments in transit? And then what are also some of the challenges that you might face in supporting multiple options for consumers to pay? Andrew, let's start with you.
Sure. I think I'll start off by saying, and my co-panelists will probably agree that maximizing consumer choice is a big priority for everyone, and it will lead to greater ridership and inclusion. Interac did a survey in 2020 that's across Canada, and we looked to gain some feedback from riders, specifically transit riders, and we found that more than half of transit users around Canada are looking for new ways, alternate ways to pay for their trips. Around 70% or 69% to be exact of those riders are willing and interested in trying the concept of open payments, which we can kind of, I think, unwrap a little bit here today. From a debit standpoint, something around 94 to 95% of Canadians have a debit card, which represents, there's about 40 million cards out there today, and 27 million of those are used on a daily basis. So we know the demand side of the equation is there. We know consumers want to use these ways to pay. And so from the Interac side, what we've been really focused on is developing solutions to try to address these emerging needs and the growing mobility ecosystem. Over the last several years, I would say, we've been working closely with financial institutions and Payments Canada on making the infrastructure compatible with these new methods, and are looking forward to that coming to fruition in the not too distant future. Of course, we also want to acknowledge and appreciate that this isn't a one size fits all type of approach. Different markets will need different solutions, and so ensuring that everyone has the right way to pay is going to be really important for all of us. Maybe I'll let some of my co-panelists jump in here and add their bit.
Taya, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, yes to all of that. I mean, certainly introducing choice is really imperative. Here in the GTHA, we're moving from a closed loop, stored value kind of card-based system that's been in place for a really long time. I think its development started about 15 years ago, and a lot of legacy infrastructure. And so, as is happening all across payment, we're kind of overhauling that to move to more modern infrastructure and architecture and enable open payment on our network. It's certainly what we hear from customers that they want. We want to introduce the ability to pay by credit and debit card, as well as moving more of our services over to digital channels, so enabling people to use devices to pay rather than the card, while still supporting unbanked customers and still supporting the use of cash across the network. So when we talk about barriers to that, I mean, certainly we have a lot of technology work to do. That's kind of one of the barriers to us moving as fast as we'd like, and we are progressing as rapidly as we can. We also think a lot about the access and equity barriers to our customers using contactless specifically as an example. So contactless gets rid of barriers for us in the sense that we're enabling people to use cards that they already have available to them. They don't need to go to a specific retail outlet to get a card, although we are also kind of extending our retail coverage for the PRESTO card. So it gives, I think, more access. From an equity perspective, we want to make sure that both our customers that use credit cards and our customers that don't and rely on debit cards are able to use their cards on transit. And also we want to make sure that that's affordable. So some of the stuff that we think about is like for those transit micro payments that happen multiple times a day, how do we make sure that our lowest income customers aren't charged fees that are prohibitive in their use of those services?
Yeah, I can add to that as well. Our philosophy is very much, as Andy pointed out, what you have in your wallet is what we want to be able to accept from a customer's perspective. Convenience is key. And certainly contactless debit is really important to be part of that convenience. A barrier, obviously, to your point, is we have to be inclusive. We need to be able to provide payment options for everyone and for people that don't have access to credit and debit facilities. We've just actually reintroduced the tear-off transfers and manual fare boxes. So we're doing a bit of both. We're doing some very, very low technology solutions that will allow people to continue to pay cash where they want to. And on the other end of it, some very high technology solutions where you can pay with contactless, different forms of form factors, from wristbands to Fitbits to smartphones. And so we're really trying to bring something for everyone as a solution.
So Mark, just to jump on that, do you find that, we've talked about how contactless reduces barriers, but when you have to offer so many options for customers, is there a barrier with that? Is there a barrier or is there difficulties with including cash, contactless, close, like all of them together? I know that TransLink, you guys have had credit cards for a couple of years now. So have you seen that any issues with that?
Yeah, certainly. The cash collection is a very expensive undertaking. The cash, while it dropped initially with our introduction of our smart card by about 40%, and is continuing to drop. And introducing contactless payment, we see it continuing to fall further. But it's still tens of millions of dollars of coins alone on buses. And so it's an enormous undertaking to take that cash off of buses, count that cash, remit the cash to the banks, and we actually recirculate the coin back through our vending machine. It's on a scale of such that, and I'm sure Toronto's and that case would be similar in any major city. It's enough cash that in the event that in Vancouver's case, TransLink weren't to remit that cash, the city would actually dry up of coin. So it's a lot. It costs a lot, and but it is something that we're seeing some success with fewer people paying cash when they have other options.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks, Mark. So maybe to flip a little bit here, clearly, like we talked about, contactless payments provides that convenience. And so in this environment, in the transit environment with contactless payments, how is this going to feel different for consumers, if at all, versus a regular, POS payment? And are there any deterrents for customers to use this? Andrew, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think from a consumer standpoint, what's important is that the experience should feel seamless and convenient, and no different than buying a morning coffee or going to the grocery store. Perhaps even more so when we consider the fact that there's got to be a speed element associated with the transit environment. Transactions need to be processed in under a second, and oftentimes under 500 milliseconds. Mark and Taya can probably speak more to that as experts. I think the long-term vision and the goal is that payments in general need to become largely invisible and be contextualized by the user experience and used, in whatever environment you're looking to pay. The payment should happen together with the intended experience that the customer is doing, whether that's travel or shopping, etc. For debit specifically, in order to make some of this technology work across the ecosystem, we've had to make some changes on the back end, and that's what's really taken a little bit of time to get us there. The financial industry as a whole, as I mentioned off the top there, has had to upgrade some of the infrastructure to support some of these payments, and for good reason. Interac debit, which has been around for decades now, has centered around two key pillars, making sure that the consumers are always protected and the merchants are always protected. So once a transaction is processed, the merchant is guaranteed those funds, and once the customer knows what they've bought and they're never charged more than what they agreed to pay up front. So working within those constructs, we had to, update our rules and regulations together with Payments Canada to ensure that these new age use cases are also in existence. So those are my comments for that.
Taya, what about you? Do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I mean, what we think about a lot, I think generally with transit payment, we want to bring it as close to retail payment as possible, but there are some inherent differences between the two. One being, Andrew pointed out, kind of the need for speed. When you're in rush hour in downtown Toronto, you're needing to process payments. We aim for under 500 milliseconds, but basically to enable a steady flow of traffic through a gate as the best example. We are not gated everywhere, but we are on large portions of our service, so as not to essentially plug up an entire station and potentially cause safety concerns. We want to do that while also ensuring that we're processing payment and that revenues are secured for the agencies that we're serving. So the management of that is like an interesting kind of technical context for us to manage, but we need to do that without it being felt by the customer. So what we want for our customer is a seamless, frictionless experience that doesn't feel different from retail. And what we also think about a lot and are working on now as we start piloting credit cards and then debit cards out in the market is creating a consistent experience across the use of different cards. Because right now there are some nuanced variances kind of between the different cards and between credit and debit, and we're working really closely with our partners within the payment brands with Andrew at Interac to make sure that the experience, kind of before you travel, while you're traveling, after you travel, is really consistent, so that I know when I can look up my transaction history. I know how to process a refund should I need one. I know how debt reconciliation is managed as a customer, and that doesn't feel different when I use different cards. And it's a challenge, but I think we're getting there.
That makes sense. And you talked, a little bit about on the merchant side as well. So Mark, do you have anything to add there, like the risks that potentially occur for on the merchant side of things?
Yeah, just touch on the one major sort of consideration that we give to it is sort of that payment anxiety. So it's from a consumer's perspective, is it going to work, and is it going to work, and I'm not going to keep the lines clogging up in a busy rush hour. So pulling out a card and then having it take even longer than moments, like half a second. That's a long time when you're standing in line with a bunch of people waiting to get into a gate behind you and catch a train. So really it's mitigating that, making sure that we have robust systems that allow that, works every time, and the customer can easily tap and just travel and focus on travel as opposed to the payment, which is something that we're trying to take out of that whole equation. The how much do I pay and the how do I pay shouldn't really be a big consideration. So that's really the philosophy that we've brought to that. The technology to support that is a big challenge.
So we have a question that has come in kind of related to what we're talking about here. So, it was noted that last March, Moneris was certified by Interac for its mass transit processing platform. And the question is really, Taya knows that Transport for London, the experience there is that it works very well. It's universal. So I think the question here is, if we have this certification, like, where's our barrier here now? Maybe I'll let Andrew take that one on.
Sure, I'll try to tackle that a little bit. So I think it's a good question. It highlights the fact that progress is being made across the ecosystem. What needs to be also considered is that even in a country like Canada, which is much smaller than the US, for example, we still have a ton of different parties, actors in these ecosystems. So in the transit environment, for example, you have the disparate various transit agencies in their respective municipalities. You have their technology service providers and partners, and then you have the payment networks, of course, whether that would be debit or credit, or some of the closed loop solutions that are out there and have been talked about today. So, I think part of the question was around, being so some of the payment processors, such as Moneris, taking a leap into mobility and making that a focus of their business for the foreseeable future, which is a great positive positive step, and I think it will lead to in the not too distant future, it's going to lead some positive news and adoption, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Mark or Taya, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can just add, to echo Andrew's points, it's different systems, different maturity in terms of the solutions that have been brought to market, and so there's a lack of standardization. A lot of different players that are involved in each payment transaction that is invisible to the customer, and getting development for that can be very, very challenging, because you end up with all sorts of different solutions that get engineered for the same problem in different ways for different payment types. So that's sort of the challenge behind the scenes. I think everybody will agree that facilitating it and getting through that is the goal, but it's not always easy or inexpensive.
I think those are good answers. I mean, MTT is really essential. The question kind of pointing to the fact that Transport for London really rooted itself in kind of developing consistency around that MTT model, and I think in that implementation also really hammered out some of what we need MTT to do, how it kind of manages the protection of liability, how it manages customer experience. All of that was really important work and is central to the way in which we're developing and kind of working to roll out contactless within Metrolinx, and important in the way that we're working with our partners in doing that. In terms of like why not yet, I would agree with Andrew that we're really close. We've been working on the implementation with all of the various partners involved. We're kind of at the point of hammering out final details, and in really late phases of testing. There are a lot of elements, right? And that's interesting, I think, from a transit perspective, because we're used to working in a very closed environment, and now working in this broad ecosystem of partners and testing across that and managing the complexities across that. For example, right now we're kind of learning about some of the intricacies of cards issued by specific providers, and how two issuers work differently on our network, and how we smooth out the experience across those two issuers' cards. So kind of as we get through those late stages of testing, I think you'll be seeing pilots soon on our network.
I actually wanted to add to what you said there. It's an excellent point. I am from a technology barrier perspective. I think the impact that contactless payments, what can we do to simplify the adoption of these technologies? And one stat that stands out a lot, we see it in our data every day, is that pre-pandemic Canada was already quite comfortable. Let's say Canadians were quite comfortable using contactless transactions. I think we were nearly half of all of our transactions were contactless, 47% to be exact. Now, fast forward to June 2021, it's closer to 65%. So you can see how the adoption of contactless, touchless transactions has really accelerated throughout the pandemic. And the big elephant in the room, I'm sure everyone talks about it on a daily basis. But one of the positives is that consumers have shifted towards these methods, and it's likely for the foreseeable future, with all the guidance from public health around social distancing and limiting those high-touch interactions, we'll really see things like contactless allow us to get back to normal sooner rather than later. At the same time, and I want to add one more point that I think kind of underpins this whole goal of ours, collective goal of ours, is that we need to find a better way to cooperate amongst the public and the private sector as a whole. I'll give you guys an example from my previous life working in financial crime and fraud risk. If you live in a neighborhood and your neighbor's house keeps getting broken into, and your neighbor needs some help, catching the bad guys, but you're kind of indifferent to it. You say, you know what, not my problem. That may be fine and dandy for a little while, but eventually your neighbor is going to go build a higher fence, set up some cameras, get a security system. And chances are those bad guys are going to then target your house next. And so, that simple analogy translates really well to things that we've experienced in the financial sector, both here in Canada and around the world. When we look back to the early 2000s and all the way through to 2009, 2010, when up until the point we started rolling out chip cards and chip technology, criminals were having a field day with counterfeit payment cards. Both debit and credit was just getting hammered with fraud. And we're talking billions of dollars in losses on a yearly basis across the industry. And what became apparent very quickly is criminals would attack one financial institution, get millions of dollars out. That institution would react, build some defenses, protect itself a little better, and then the criminals would move on and attack the next institution. It became a game of whack-a-mole. Who can build the better defense, and then the weaker one will get attacked. And what happened, luckily and rather quickly, is the financial industry in Canada came together, formed a consortium, shared data, intelligence, and worked. Competitors started to work closely together to fight off the bad guys, which decreased fraud losses by 80-90%. Until we got to a point where chip cards were rolled out and the that vector of attack was closed. So it's a perfect example, I think, where co-opetition of seeming cooperation between seeming competitors leads to this type of cooperation, which allows for mutual benefits to be had. Now, I'll translate that into the mobility world by saying, the public sector and the private sector have a lot of common interests here. We all want to have a better customer experience. We all want ridership to go back to pre-pandemic levels, even if it'll be different. Even if we'll be working from home time to time, people will still have to move around. And if we can come together sooner rather than later, work a little bit closer together to enable better customer experiences, I think that will lead to some great things. Those are my thoughts there.
Thanks, guys. That actually leads to a really good point too. In the past, I would probably say pre-pandemic, there have been some hesitations from consumers and from legislators regarding the security of these contactless payments, which you've kind of touched about. So do we think the global pandemic has accelerated this? Has it been a catalyst for the trust to strengthen, or has it kind of gone the other way?
I can certainly, I don't see the trust factor being raised frequently by customers. The adoption has accelerated, and I think it's part of the change process, similar to chip and PIN being introduced and the adoption of that. More and more, it's the convenience of just being able to tap and not have to actually, touch a keypad, do all those things that's attractive. So it's simple, it works. I noticed in the chat there is some questions about what about fees and those things. Those are concerns. Fees associated with small transactions are often exceeding the actual transaction in a transit space. So those are big concerns, but security certainly isn't one of them.
Yeah, I'd say for us, security and privacy concerns are and have always been and will continue to be really primary to our business. I think, within PRESTO, we've kind of made privacy part of our brand promise to our customers because we hear from them that that's really important to them. I think Andrew will have great stats to give you on exactly what customers are saying. I will, though, talk a little bit to the point about what's the difference pre-pandemic and mid-pandemic and post-pandemic. I think, we saw a really big drop in ridership, obviously, over the course of the pandemic. So in 2020, we were down 58% on fare payment and 65% in boardings across our services. So a lot of our focus now is in thinking about how to encourage return to ridership, make return to ridership feel safe, make return to ridership feel easy, ensure that where do I find my PRESTO card because I haven't left my room in a year and I don't know how to function in the universe anymore. I think is a barrier for people, right? Like we haven't been, we're out of the patterns of behavior that we used to have around how do I travel, how do I pay, what do I use to pay? And so for us, it's huge to be able to offer really simple top of wallet, already in my pocket ways to pay to take some of that complexity out, and to have those transactions be contactless, not require a lot of interaction with people, all of that kind of stuff. And we're also looking at data that we get from our payment systems to be able to communicate to customers around kind of crowding on services. And I think that there's been like a big appetite for all of that, bigger appetite than we'd seen previously for contactless, big appetite for information that we get out of our payment systems on, what are the least crowded journeys that I can pick. And we expect to see that, continue seeing that. But then as the pandemic, fingers crossed, reaches kind of its end game, and we expect to see a return to ridership, we see contactless as a big part of doing that really successfully.
Andrew, you want to add in your stat that I was talking about?
Yeah, sure. I think to echo the points made by Mark and Taya there, it's obvious that the pandemic had a massive impact on the entire payments industry, but it was exacerbated on mobility and transit. When we saw last March and into April, transactions across the Interac network were down, 35, 40%. But the mobility and transit segments were hit much harder, 85%, 80, 85%. And so with these rolling lockdown situations and, fingers crossed, we're almost out of the woods on that soon. These sectors continue to lag. So there's clearly still both hesitation and also lack of use today. Luckily, I think, the confidence from a consumer standpoint in contactless payments remains strong. I think we've proven across the financial sector in Canada, we've proven that, fraud risk itself is quite low and manageable today. I think Canada enjoys some of the lowest fraud rates in the world, at least on debit, for where the stats are familiar to me. And so we think that next leap of scaling these solutions across the country is going to be successful. It's something that we're looking forward to, and perhaps we can take the opportunity with the current slowdown in users to really invest, test, and improve these technologies across the country.
That's awesome. And I know personally, I've seen some announcements that some of the debit card acceptance is coming to Ottawa. I know a credit card is coming on our OC Transpo as well. So I think it's moving in the right direction, as you guys all have said. And kind of to go back a little bit to the technology piece, is we know that there are some legacy technology pieces that have contributed to the time that it's taking to kind of come to this ubiquitous platform. So maybe to go back to the technology piece a little bit, we've talked a little bit about some of those barriers. I know, for example, that some of those systems, like those machines itself, are a little bit different in a contactless environment, in a transit environment. When customers are tapping their card, it's a different system, right? And so that being one of the barriers, and I'm sure you guys will touch on a couple other ones, but are there ways that we can simplify this adoption for this technology piece? And is there infrastructure investments that either of you are involved in, and kind of what does that look like right now? Maybe Mark, we'll start with you, since you TransLink has been involved in this already for a couple of years.
Yeah, thanks. I guess the starting point is to have an appreciation for how complex a revenue system is for a transit agency. It's a major system. They're worth hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on them. Some of the bigger agencies that we're seeing in the United States are well into the $750 million to put a system together and more. And so the reason for that is the complexity. They have to process just millions of transactions a day. They have to do it very, very quickly, and they have to do it very accurately. It's also in an environment that is very different. If you look at a bus, and you can think about, you're dependent upon the communications for the devices on that bus to your back-end systems. And that's very, very different than in a retail environment where there's lines to hardwire those devices to your connectivity, your networks. And then, of course, you've got all of the different scenarios. You've got heavy rail that would be a platform without gates potentially, and then you've got a subway or SkyTrain system in our case where it is gated. And so you've got that, and then combined with the scale. We have over 5,000 mobile readers on our buses alone, and so every one of those devices has to connect through to a back-end network as well as be able to work autonomously. It has to have all of its updates and be online. And all of that is what adds to the complexity and, of course, the cost to these systems. With any system, you've got to keep current. To Andrew's point about security, all of these things contain both personal as well as financial information. And so ensuring that trust for your customers takes a lot of effort, a lot of concerted effort to make sure that those systems are robust. We are currently, we enjoy a hybrid system that is both card-based as well as open account-based, so you can use your credit cards. But we too are looking at investment in our current system to make sure that it stays ahead of the demands that may be coming our way from payments and flexibility.
Thanks, Mark. And Taya, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that was I think, good explanation of the complexity that we face. Is quite interesting. So in Toronto, we're still also supporting, a stored value card, and all of our devices currently, contain complex logic to interact with that smart card that we've got in field now. And so it's an interesting transition to figure out how to seamlessly move from that to open payment and then to like an account-based credential card rather than a smart card, and how to transition our devices from that high level of complexity and processing logic, that sit on the device now, to kind of pull that off and move to a simple standard EMV, device that interacts with a credential and move all of our processing logic to the back end. When we get there, it's going to make it way easier for us to evolve our infrastructure, update our fare rules, update pricing, engage with customers differently. But it's a costly transition. There is a lot of investment going on right now to enable that. We've overhauled the validators and kiosks in large parts of our network and still have that yet to do in big parts of the TTC network. And that's critical to enabling open payment to work on those parts of the networks that have kind of more legacy devices in place. We're also thinking a lot about kind of our back-end systems and moving from a closed architecture to an open architecture that's API-based, to enable new things from our back end. So to enable new partnerships, to enable openness in terms of the payments that we can accept, but also to be able to connect into different types of mobility, to be able to retail in new ways, to be able to kind of link up that mobility as a service idea where you can really kind of pay for your end-to-end journey as opposed to each segment kind of individually. So we're in the midst of that re-architecting, and we've got a big reprocurement program going on to replace our kind of core back-end systems and services in 2022. So it's a really exciting time for us in terms of modernization.
I'm going to jump right in because so many of those points resonate with me as well. I think the capital investment required, especially for major transit agencies like in Vancouver and Toronto, is huge, humongous. And I think we should also not forget about the smaller agencies and smaller municipalities that are often somewhat underfunded and probably don't even have the capital required to stand up the types of infrastructure needed for some of these newer technologies. So one of the goals, I think, has to be to find a way to incorporate all municipalities across Canada to be able to adopt some of these new things, whether that's through future 5G connectivity that will help alleviate some of the technical roadblocks, or some kind of a public-private, back to my spiel about public-private partnerships, finding a way to enable these smaller jurisdictions to still be able to offer competitive services. I know this, just one great example always stands out, like Innisfil, this tiny, relatively tiny municipality, it partnered with Uber in a non-traditional sense, but they decided that it was better to replace some of their aging bus fleets with, ride-sharing applications, specifically to offer a better experience to their customers, and it resulted in cost savings. I don't quote me on this, but I think they spent upwards of $1 million, $900,000 a year subsidizing Uber rides for their residents. But what it results in is a better user experience, high adoption rates, and at the end, lower costs. So if we can take that next step in thinking to say, now we're in a place where we can enable better experiences. Taya was talking about, multimodal transit, the ability to plan your ride, pay for it in one shot, and know exactly where you're going from point A to point B. A huge piece of that is the first mile, last mile problem, right? Not everyone, somebody may want to take advantage of a train, but they need to get to the train station and then get back home. There has to be a way for us to come together and deliver, that ubiquitous experience that the consumers need in order to actually take up those technologies. And so for me, I'm most excited about the opportunities for us coming out of the pandemic with a focus on getting people back out and moving again, having the government side of the equation work closely with the private sector to enable some of these new and exciting technologies, which I think will allow Canada to progress and grow. And we can go on and on about the expected immigration rates and how much our population is going to grow. We're going to need to underpin that with some real infrastructure investment.
Absolutely. I think all three of you made excellent points in this. And it's obviously ubiquity is what everyone is looking for. And even I've seen a few questions come into the chat about ubiquity and how can we do this, right? And so maybe that's a good way to ask you all, based on the infrastructure builds you guys are talking about, based on the need for ubiquity, what are your thoughts on adding other payment types, right? Like WeChat, will it be flexible for that, or RuPay, different alternatives to just the traditional debit and credit aspect? And, will this work also if I go to Toronto or Vancouver? And, how do we see that ubiquity coming together?
We are really interested in kind of both expanding the payment methods that we support and also expanding the value of PRESTO and the card that we've got to customers. And we're thinking about different ways of doing that. We've actually got an expression of interest currently out in market where we've been engaging with kind of the payment industry to look at what the opportunities are to enable new payment players, and also to partner in the delivery of our own card and what we can build onto that in terms of loyalty, in terms of connecting different types of services. So definitely it's an area of interest. I think partnership is the way to go, and kind of the building of this open architecture that allows us to kind of connect different methods of payment and different kind of elements of value together smoothly for customers are the building blocks kind of getting there for customers.
Yeah, I can add to that. We've been in discussions with several of the emerging payment platforms, and we're definitely interested in offering those solutions as well. We look to emerging trends, and we're looking at that to see where we're going to need to be positioned in 5 and 10 years. Right now, when we look at those, they're predominantly QR code based solutions, which works well in a lot of circumstances. In a retail environment, works very, very well, but is incompatible with the NFC system that a lot of transit agencies have implemented. And so there's an infrastructure piece that would have to go along with that to actually enable it. But once you have those dual mode or multiple mode readers on all of your fleet and all of your entry points, then you can actually experiment, go into and introduce those types of payments and actually quite easily integrate them with your system. definitely something to watch, and we're certainly keen in looking at who is gaining sort of traction with their payment platforms.
And I think choice is a good thing. Even speaking from an Interac standpoint, I think we want to practice what we preach. And I talked about about co-opetition and cooperation. I think in a transit environment, allowing options and letting the consumer choose what is the most convenient for them for that everyday transaction type is the right way to go. And so to the extent that we can help enable some of these technologies, work with other partners, it is something that is top of mind. At the end of the day, if collectively we can offer a good experience to the end users, to the consumers, it'll be better for everyone.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think those are all great points too. And, I know we have a couple minutes left, but it does nicely lead into my last question I have for you all. And if you don't answer some of the questions in this next question, which I think some of you will, then we'll see if we can tackle one or two questions at the end. But I mean, from each of your perspectives, what is the future now for contactless payments? And, what does it look like in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, so really exciting. I think we talked to some of it actually in the last point. In 5 years, so we're definitely looking to partnerships and figuring out new ways of delivering services to customers. We're thinking about how, as I said, how we can kind of add value to our payment product, but really doing that in partnership. And when I say partnership, I mean partnering kind of with payment brands on the kind of method of payment, partnering on loyalty, partnering with retailers to offer new kinds of offerings, and of course with mobility services. I saw a question pop up actually as to whether we'd consider like payment beyond transit. And certainly I think it's a really interesting question, and we have an infrastructure that I think is really valuable in considering payment beyond transit. So we're just really thinking through what would be the use cases that would make sense for us as a business and for us as a public service body. Continuing to offer more choice for customers. We've talked a lot about multimodal, mobility as a service, loyalty. We're really also refocusing ourselves, and one might say that we're late in the game for doing this, for kind of all of those legacy reasons that we discussed, but really refocusing ourselves as a digital brand. So moving away from the PRESTO as a card and really thinking through what we want PRESTO to look like, what we want PRESTO to offer to our customers and our clients in the future. And then if we kind of consider this notion of seamlessness, I guess beyond kind of rolling out contactless across our network, and if we think about the 5 to 10 year horizon rather than the 1 to 5 year horizon, I want to be thinking about, payment without tapping. So I want to also be thinking about kind of that totally frictionless experience of being able to enter and exit services and have payment be calculated automatically. We're seeing that with retail, obviously, now with Amazon starting that trend, and that's extending more broadly. And we actually do see that in really small markets too, in transit. So for example, there's a pilot that I know of in Switzerland where essentially they're using beacon technology to be able to detect an app moving into and off of a platform and are charging on that basis. So that's also something that I keep an eye on in terms of kind of evolving the customer experience. Lots of privacy and security implications. So we're not there yet, but I think it's a really exciting opportunity.
That's amazing. Thanks, Taya. And Andrew?
I love everything that Taya said, so sign me up for that. I think the ubiquitous adoption of all the major payment options across the country, so Canadians can easily move around, whether it's for personal travel or work, and be able to make those seamless payments. It has to be the goal. That kind of single payment, multimodal experience has to be something that we're looking down the road towards. I'll steal a line from a gentleman a lot smarter than I, Gandhi. He said, the future depends on what you do today. So, if we're looking at 5 to 10 years down the road, we need to start thinking about it now. And I think that's the cusp of it. It's important for us to get over some of the legacy challenges we have, but at the same time, we need to be investing and spending equal amount of effort, if not more, on focusing on those 5 to 10 year goals in order to achieve them in the end. So those would be my thoughts.
And I can certainly add to that. The scale of these systems is such that 3 years is a minimum, really, to do and implement a technological improvement into these systems. So 3 to 5 years is really just the starting point from the decision. We look much further than that to trends and where we think we're going to go. Contactless, in my opinion, certainly it's borne out with the data. It's going to grow. It's going to grow. It is growing very, very rapidly. We see that generally, and it's that convenience. It's frictionless, and it's a lack of payment anxiety. The Nevada state is that if you're traveling, no matter which way you're traveling, whether it's a multimodal trip or a single trip, that you don't have to think about how to pay and what to pay with. That what you have in your wallet, or even better, if you can seamlessly travel without even interacting, and we're starting to see some of the, we're actually testing some of this technology now, makes it a very, very convenient experience and increases the adoption of public transit in general. So those are things that we definitely are looking to jump onto.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been amazing, guys. Thank you so much. We have about a minute left. So I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a very interesting conversation. One of the things I really liked that you said, Mark, was, what you have in your wallet is what we want you to be able to use. But in addition, looking forward to the future is and also Taya mentioned it, is just being able to walk in somewhere and not really have to tap something. I think that's really important. And some of the key themes have been around ubiquity, which is on everyone's mind. Some of the, we've heard some of the barriers to access, but some of the technology build has come so far. I know we still have a little bit of ways to go, but I think the future is bright for contactless payments. And yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you all. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the summit. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.